Christopher Nolan is bringing a giant new film adaptation of this story to theaters soon. You have probably heard the title Odyssey somewhere, maybe a school syllabus. A blind poet named Homer composed it close to 2,800 years ago. It tracks one man's 10-year fight to reach home after a war. The sea route from Troy to Ithaca covers roughly 600 miles. A steady ship today clears that distance in about 2 weeks. Odysseus needed 10 years instead, and that gap is the whole story. Gods, monsters, storms, and his own pride kept dragging him off course. We are tracing the full story tonight, from Ithaca to the final homecoming. By the end, you will know why this story is still being retold nearly 3,000 years later. The Odyssey started as spoken performance, not printed text. Traveling singers called rhapsodes memorized it and performed it from town to town. That is why the plot jumps around, repeats lines, and circles back on itself. The earlier Trojan War epic, the Iliad, is about rage and battlefield glory. The Odyssey trades battlefield glory for survival and the fight to get home. One epic is about winning a war. The other is about surviving what comes after. That difference shapes almost every choice Odysseus makes for the next 10 years. The story opens not with Odysseus, but with his son, Telemachus. Odysseus has been gone 20 years, 10 at war and 10 more missing. Everyone in Ithaca assumes he is dead, and his household is falling apart. Over 100 suitors have moved into the palace uninvited. They are eating through Odysseus' stores and pressuring his wife Penelope to remarry. Penelope stalls them with a trick involving a burial shroud. She promises to choose a husband once the shroud is finished. Every night, she quietly unpicks the threads she wove that day. The trick works for 3 full years before a servant finally exposes it. Telemachus is caught in the middle, disrespected in his own home.
He grew up without his father, and the suitors treat that absence as an opportunity. Some of them are quietly plotting to remove him from the line of succession entirely. The goddess Athena visits him in disguise and pushes him to act. She tells him to sail out and learn what happened to his father. Before leaving, Telemachus confronts the suitors and demands they leave his house. They laugh him off, so he gathers a small, loyal crew in secret. He sets sail at night without telling his mother where he is going. At Pylos, old King Nestor shares fragments from the final days of the war. Nestor remembers a bitter argument that split the Greek army after victory. He sends Telemachus onward to Sparta, to a king who might know more. At Sparta, King Menelaus and Queen Helen host him and share one more clue. Menelaus once wrestled a shape-shifting sea god for answers of his own. That sea god told him Odysseus is alive, trapped on Calypso's island. Menelaus also mentions that Agamemnon, the war's supreme commander, was murdered right after coming home. That detail hangs over the rest of the story, a warning about what homecomings can hide. For Telemachus, that single fact is enough reason to sail straight home. Back in Ithaca, the suitors learn he left and plan an ambush for his return. On that island, Odysseus is not being tortured, he is being kept comfortable. Calypso offers him safety, comfort, and even immortality if he stays. He turns all of it down because he wants his old life back. Zeus finally orders Calypso to release him, so he builds a raft. He sails out alone, and Poseidon notices immediately. Poseidon smashes the raft apart with a sudden storm. Odysseus barely survives, clinging to wreckage for days. He washes up on the shore of Scheria, home to the Phaeacians. Princess Nausicaa finds him there, naked and exhausted. She gives him clothing and brings him back to her parents' palace. The king and queen host him properly: food, rest, basic dignity. A court poet sings about the fall of Troy, and Odysseus breaks down in tears.
The king notices the tears and finally asks the stranger to name himself. Right after Troy fell, his fleet raided the town of Ismarus. His men refused to leave quickly and got hit by a counterattack. Next, they reached the Lotus Eaters, whose fruit wiped out memory and ambition. Several of his crew ate it and refused to leave the island. Odysseus dragged them back to the ships by force. Next came the island of the Cyclops, one-eyed sons of Poseidon. The cave was stocked with cheese and milk, so hungry men helped themselves. Odysseus and a scouting party entered the cave of Polyphemus. Polyphemus sealed the entrance with a boulder no human could move. He crushed 2 of the men and ate them raw. Odysseus offered the giant strong wine and told him his name was Nobody. Once Polyphemus passed out drunk, the crew sharpened a wooden stake. They drove the stake into his single eye while he slept. Polyphemus screamed that nobody was killing him, so the other giants ignored him. The next morning, the men strapped themselves under the bellies of sheep. Polyphemus felt the backs of every sheep, never checking underneath a single one. They slipped past the blind giant undetected and reached their ship. His crew begged him to stay quiet, but pride got the better of him. Sailing off, Odysseus made a fatal mistake and shouted his real name. Polyphemus prayed to his father Poseidon for revenge on the spot. Poseidon answered by cursing Odysseus's entire journey home. At the floating island of Aeolus, the Wind King gave him a gift. Aeolus hosted the crew for a month, then sent them off with real help. The sack held every storm wind, sealed away for a safe voyage. Odysseus steered the whole way himself, refusing to sleep, until exhaustion won. With Ithaca finally in sight, the crew opened the bag looking for gold. Every wind rushed out at once and blew the ships back across the sea. Next, the fleet reached the Laestrygonians, cannibal giants guarding a narrow harbor. The giants hurled boulders down and smashed 11 of 12 ships. Only Odysseus's own ship escaped the harbor alive. Out of 12 ships that left Troy, one now carried what remained of his crew. The survivors landed on Circe's island, home to a powerful witch. Circe fed a scouting party a drugged meal and turned them into pigs. Hermes gave Odysseus a protective herb before he faced her himself. Immune to her magic, Odysseus drew his sword and forced her to reverse it. Circe became an ally and told him he had to visit the underworld next. The crew stayed on her island a full year before finally continuing the voyage. In the land of the dead, Odysseus spoke with the ghost of his mother. The prophet Tiresias warned him about one danger still ahead: the cattle of the sun. "Touch those sacred cattle," Tiresias said, "and every man on the ship would die." Odysseus also met the ghosts of comrades who died at Troy, including Agamemnon. Agamemnon warned him that homecomings are not always safe, since his own ended in murder. Back at sea, Odysseus faced the Sirens, whose song lured sailors to their deaths. He had his crew plug their ears with wax and tie him to the mast. The ship passed safely while Odysseus strained against the ropes, unharmed. He became, by the story's account, the first man to hear the sirens and live. Next came a narrow strait between Scylla, a six-headed monster, and Charybdis, a whirlpool. Steering close to Scylla, Odysseus lost 6 men to save the rest of the ship. He chose not to warn them exactly which side carried the danger. 6 deaths against a whirlpool that would have swallowed the entire ship. Starving on the island of the sun god, the crew ignored every warning. While Odysseus slept, they slaughtered the sacred cattle and ate the meat. Zeus answered by striking their departing ship with lightning. The whole crew drowned, and only Odysseus survived, clinging to broken wood. 9 days adrift later, he washed up again on Calypso's island. That is where his story to the Phaeacians ends, back where it began.
Moved by the tale, the Phaeacians loaded a ship with treasure for him. They sailed him home to Ithaca, while he slept through the entire voyage. He woke alone, on a beach he barely recognized as his own kingdom. Athena met him there, and warned him the palace was not safe to enter openly. She disguised him as a filthy old beggar before he took a single step home. In disguise, he first found his loyal swineherd, Eumaeus, tending pigs in the hills. Eumaeus fed him and spoke bitterly about the suitors ruining his master's house. Telemachus, back from his own journey, arrived at the same hut soon after. Athena revealed Odysseus's true form to his son in private. Father and son embraced, then began plotting how to retake the palace. The plan was simple: lock away the suitors' weapons and trap them inside. Disguised again, Odysseus entered his own palace and endured open mockery. One suitor even threw a stool at his head for asking for food. Penelope, still not recognizing him, announced a final contest for her hand. Whoever could string Odysseus's old bow and shoot through 12 lined-up axe heads would win her. One by one, the suitors strained against the bow and failed completely. The ragged beggar then asked quietly for his own turn. Odysseus strung the bow as easily as tuning an instrument. He fired a single arrow clean through all 12 axe heads. The disguise fell away, and the room went completely silent. Odysseus turned the bow on the suitors and killed their leader first. Telemachus and 2 loyal servants joined him, since the weapons room stayed locked. They fought through the hall until every suitor lay dead on the floor. Over 100 men who had spent 3 years draining his home were gone in one morning. With the suitors gone, Odysseus faced a harder test, convincing his own wife. Penelope tested him by ordering a servant to move their marriage bed. Odysseus objected instantly, since he had built that bed around a living olive tree. Only the real Odysseus could know that detail, and Penelope finally embraced him. 20 years of grief and suspicion broke in that single moment of recognition. The next morning, the suitors' angry relatives marched on the palace for revenge. Athena stepped between both sides and forced an uneasy truce. Without her intervention, Ithaca was heading straight into a civil war over the killings. The bloodshed stopped, and Odysseus was finally settled back on his throne. 20 years after leaving for Troy, he was king of Ithaca again. On the surface, this looks like a monster story wrapped around a homecoming. Underneath that, it is a story about what war leaves behind in a person. Odysseus does not return as the same man who sailed for Troy 20 years earlier. The real question was never whether he would get home. It was what the trip would cost him, and what he would become along the way.
Nearly 3,000 years later, audiences are still asking that same question. That is likely why Nolan picked this story for a modern retelling. A story about coming home changed is still worth telling in any century. The scale of it is easy to forget. 10 years lost, 100 suitors dead, a kingdom nearly lost. Every stop on that route, real or invented, still shows up on modern maps of the Mediterranean. That is the full arc, from a collapsing household in Ithaca to a king back on his throne. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on even more stories.